gave her father 41. Lizzie Borden took gas.
The sinister nursery rhyme sung to the tune of Ring Around the Rosie has been on the lips of children for more than 130 years, retelling the tale of Lizzie's exploits as a murderer. Often, many of the details of crimes as famous as the Borden murders become inundated with salacious rumors, and with each retelling, the actual facts become diminished to a point that you can't tell fact from rumor. The facts are, someone murdered Abby Borden in the guest room of her home sometime after 9 a.m. that hot August morning of 1892. Using a sharp-edged weapon, most likely a short-handled hatchet, and struck Abby about the head and neck a total of 19 times. At 10:30 a.m., Andrew Borden returned home and laid down to rest on a sofa in the sitting room. Sometime, most likely between 10:45 and 11 a.m., Andrew was also killed in the same manner as his wife Abby, suffering approximately 11 blows to the face from a sharp-edged instrument similar, if not the same, used on Abby. Their killer was never brought to justice, and for many, it's always been speculated that Lizzie herself was the killer. There have been many theories about this case as to who it could have been, from a stranger coming in off the street, to Emma, the older sister, sneaking away from Fairhaven while with guests to commit the deed, to the conspiracy of Lizzie and Bridget in on it together. Recently, one of our viewers has pointed the finger at Uncle John Vinnicum Morse. Many have seen his arrival the night before the murders and across town in the presence of family at the right time as suspect. Join us as we look at the Borden murders from the angle of the mysterious Uncle John Vinnicum Morse on Crimes of the Century. The murders of Abby and Andrew Borden are still being puzzled over now for 130 years after the fact. When we step back and look at the crime scene today, it seems baffling that the murders have remained unsolved. Most all researchers on this case come to the conclusion that Lizzie is the most likely suspect. But with the forensic technologies of present day, detectives should have been able to solve this crime in no time. However, it still remains as an enigma as much today as it did in 1892. Before we delve into our focus suspect, let us acknowledge that based on all that has been written from police files and court transcripts, after 9 a.m., both Uncle John and Andrew Borden have left the house, leaving only Bridget the maid, Lizzie, and Abby alone at 92 2nd Street. By time Mr. Borden returns, about 10:30, Abby is already dead in the upstairs guest room, leaving only himself, Lizzie, and Bridget in the house. And in less than 45 minutes, he too will also be dead, thus again leaving only Lizzie and Bridget alone in the house. So if the killer is not Lizzie or Bridget, then it must be an outsider. Someone who has slipped inside and killed Abby, but doesn't attack Lizzie or Bridget and hides for approximately 90 minutes. Then waits for Andrew to return and kills him, and then silently escapes and is never seen again. Is this possible? Yes, it is possible for a stranger to slip inside and commit these murders. But if it is a stranger, they risk being seen by Lizzie and or Bridget. Unless it's not a stranger, and they've been allowed inside to murder the Bordens and escape. If it is a stranger, what is the point of the killings? It's broad daylight. People, horses, and carts are going up and down 2nd Street in front of the Bordens' house. The killer just wanders inside, perhaps hears Abby in the guest room, goes up and uses a hatchet type of instrument on her 19 times. Does the killer then remain in the room with Abby? Or do they find a place to hide for 90 minutes? You must consider someone who has just committed this type of rage killing would be in a heightened state. Calming down would take some time. Then Andrew Borden comes home and is let in via the front door by the maid, speaks with Lizzie, then lays down on the sofa in the sitting room, and within 15 minutes is dead. Had the killer slipped from the guest room or wherever the hiding place was? Strike Andrew 11 times and then escape the house unnoticed? What is the purpose of a stranger to commit this crime? It's obviously not burglary, as nothing is taken. It's not to kill everyone in the Borden house, as Lizzie and Bridget are left alone. What can be gained from this? If it is indeed a stranger and stealing is not the motive, then the only thing gained is to satiate the desire to kill. But if one takes a step back, it's obvious that Abby and Mr. Borden are the intended targets. So it could not be a stranger just fulfilling a kill lust. It would be an assassin, which means the stranger theory doesn't really hold water. With that said, if we remove the stranger from the crime scene, then we must accept that it has to be either a hired assassin or someone inside the Borden household. In a previous video, we showed, according to the official timeline and with the house plans, who was where during the events as they unfolded that summer morning. We know that Uncle John leaves the house around 8:48 a.m. Andrew shortly after that, maybe 10 to 12 minutes later, leaving only Abby, Lizzie, and Bridget inside the house. Bridget is instructed by Abby to wash all the windows inside and out. In fact, when Bridget goes outside to wash the windows, Lizzie asks her if she's going to be outside long, to which Bridget replies she will and tells her she can lock the door if she likes. Before Bridget begins washing windows, she notices the neighbor's maid outside and takes time to speak with her at the fence. After a brief conversation between the two maids, Bridget begins washing the outside windows. It is during this time Abby is murdered, with only Lizzie inside the house. We are aware that many strongly believe in Lizzie's innocence. But if she did not commit the crime, then she knows who did, and therefore becomes an accomplice to murder. This would mean Lizzie would have to have let the killer inside the locked house. Where is Lizzie while Bridget is cleaning windows? Is she in the kitchen or up in her room? If she's gone to her room, then one of two things must be. Abby is still alive at that time, or is dead laying on the floor, and there would be no way Lizzie could not have noticed her, unless the door to the guest room is closed, which would suggest the killer is still in the room with Abby's body. But we know the door isn't closed at the time Bridget and Mrs. Churchill ascend the stairs because they see Abby's dead body laying next to the bed. In Bridget's testimony, she makes the statement that when she struggled with the front door to let Mr. Borden inside, she heard Lizzie laughing, and it sounded like it came from upstairs behind her, although she would admit in court she did not see Lizzie on the stairs. This would be around 10:30 a.m. However, even Lizzie places herself on the stairs at one point, but later changes it to being in the kitchen when her father returned home. Was she upstairs changing clothes after killing Abby? If indeed she had killed both her stepmother and father, then it would require her to change her clothing not once, but twice. This would most likely have been noticed by Bridget. So we have to believe that if Lizzie did do it, she had to somehow manage to protect her clothing from blood spatter. We mentioned in our previous videos that she may have committed the crimes in the nude, as suggested by the ABC Movie of the Week, The Legend of Lizzie Borden, starring Elizabeth Montgomery. However, that in itself presents a whole new set of scenarios. What if she is seen by Bridget, or her uncle returns to the house early? How can she explain? And if seen, this most certainly means she has to kill anyone who caught her in the act, unless, of course, she is in collusion with an accomplice. It has been suggested that Lizzie and Bridget may have been in on the murders together. Some authors believe there was an intimate relationship between them, and others state Bridget merely served as the lookout while Lizzie committed the deed. Is it possible Bridget and Lizzie made up the story of the window washing? This could work if Bridget is using the ruse of washing the windows as a reason to be in the yard during the time of the first murder. However, John Morse states in his trial testimony he heard Abby tell Bridget to wash the windows. So what about the killing of Mr. Borden? Bridget going up to her room to lay down doesn't make any sense if she's in on it, as Lizzie would still need someone to keep an eye out for Uncle John's return. The payoff would be either Lizzie pays Bridget for her silence, or the two of them will collect the inheritance and live together after the fact. This is far too unlikely, as Lizzie seems to have been too dominant of a personality to share her wealth with a servant, one that she couldn't even be bothered to address by her real name. So it seems easy to rule them out as partners in crime. In fact, Bridget leaves the Borden household after the murders and never returns again. In this scenario, Uncle John becomes the killer and Lizzie the lookout. From the outset, the arrival of John Vinnicum Morse the night before the murders has always seemed somewhat suspect. He arrives the afternoon before and somehow has zero interaction with Bridget or Lizzie. In fact, he never sees Lizzie until after the murders. Although he only visits with Andrew and Abby, it doesn't seem out of character that he's not visiting with the whole family. Lizzie is either out or in her room, and Emma is away visiting friends. Andrew makes no effort to cause Lizzie to visit with her uncle, so nothing seems out of the ordinary. Uncle John seems to do all the right things. After his arrival, which is noted to be around 1:30 p.m., he eats lunch, which is referred to as dinner, on his own. His brother-in-law and wife have already eaten. He most likely visits with Andrew until he leaves between 3 and 4 p.m. that day and goes to Swansea, and then later returns that evening around 8:40 to 8:45 p.m. He arrives at the front door, rings the bell, Abby lets him into the house. He visits with only Abby and Andrew until just after 10 p.m. Abby leaves first to go to bed. Soon afterwards, he and Andrew decide to retire for the night. He then claims he heard someone enter from the front door, go upstairs to Lizzie's room, and close the door. Yet he claims to have not seen whoever it was. When he goes to the guest room, the door to Lizzie's room is closed. Morse claims to have slept all night in the room with the door open, and when he gets up at 6 the next morning, he dresses and goes downstairs, leaving the bedroom door open, noting that Lizzie's door is still closed. He makes his way to the sitting room, where he is all alone. Soon he is joined by Andrew and then Abby. Around 7 a.m., the three of them take breakfast in the dining room. After breakfast, the three of them move to the sitting room. He notes Abby is in and out several times and soon begins dusting, and he and Andrew continue to visit in the sitting room until he decides to leave to visit other family. This is approximately 8:48 a.m. Andrew sees him to the back door and he exits through it. Andrew invites him to come back and join them for lunch. Some believe that Andrew and Uncle John had a serious argument in the sitting room. But if that were the case, Morse would certainly not entertain coming back for lunch, and most likely Andrew would not have invited him. Now we have Andrew leaving the house just after 9 a.m. If Uncle John is the killer, then he waits until Andrew has left the house, steals back after making an appearance at the post office as part of his alibi. He's careful to avoid being seen by Bridget in the yard washing windows, is let in by Lizzie, who in turn watches out for Bridget while Uncle John kills Abby. Uncle John returning to the guest room would not give Abby any cause for alarm, as it's the room he slept in the night before, and anyone would most likely figure he'd be spending the night in the same room again. So if Abby saw him coming into the room, she would not be concerned, thus giving him the opportunity to strike her without warning. Once she's down and is dead, Uncle John has to either remain hidden until Andrew comes back or slip out, aided by Lizzie, and now visit with his niece, who lives about 1.25 miles from the Borden house, to further establish his alibi. But what about the blood? Wouldn't he have to change his clothes? He makes it clear in his trial testimony he did not bring any luggage with him when he came to visit the Bordens. So, with no change of clothes, how does he hide the blood? Does Lizzie provide a change of clothes for him? Perhaps some of Andrew's clothing? Are they close in size? This is the same issue for Lizzie. 2 murders would mean 2 sets of clothing, unless the murders are committed in the nude, which is highly unlikely. But what now? Doesn't he have to make an appearance at his nephew and niece's home, where he is until after 11 a.m., the time of Andrew's murder? He claims that he was with his niece from around 9:30 to 11:20 a.m., so nearly 2 hours, and now must return to the Bordens for the noon meal. This just doesn't add up. There's no way he can be at his niece's home and kill Andrew. There isn't enough time. The only way this works is Uncle John kills Abby and remains until Andrew comes home approximately 90 minutes later. Waits until Lizzie gives him the all clear, he kills Andrew, and then he has to leave the house, make an appearance at his niece's home. Andrew is dead by 11 a.m. It would take him quite a while to walk the distance, but no sooner than he'd arrive, he'd have to turn around and come back in order to be in the yard eating pears at about 11:40 a.m. And we still haven't dealt with the blood on his clothing. The only way he can commit the murders and have an alibi is if family lies for him. His niece would have to say he was there for the approximate 2 hours, which would mean he, Lizzie, and his niece are all in collusion. And why would anyone take such a risk? Money, and lots of it. If Uncle John is the killer, then it has to be for the money. He has no loyalty to Andrew. His sister's been dead for more than 30 years. He can see that his brother-in-law won't even own a house with plumbing and gas lighting. Both Emma and Lizzie were not getting along with their father, and they weren't getting any younger. And the recent gifting of a property to Abby's sister sent both Emma and Lizzie into a worrisome rage. Regardless, they feared the writing on the wall. If something happened to their father, they would lose everything. Abby would inherit his entire fortune, and they would be left out in the cold. So perhaps after the property that belonged to their mother was given to Abby's sister, Lizzie and her Uncle John had a conversation. And that conversation may have been how to work out the details on how to deal with Bridget, provide him an alibi, and that while Lizzie may be suspected, there truly would be no evidence against her. So the plan would require that Abby is killed first. That clears the way for Emma and Lizzie to inherit Andrew's estate, about $300,000 at that time, the equivalent today of nearly $10 million. In our previous video, we did make the statement that it appears that the only ones to have financially benefited from Andrew's death was Emma and Lizzie, and there is nothing to suggest that Uncle John benefited at all. However, that being said, we must remember that this is a time where cash is king. There is no personal income tax at this time. It wouldn't be for another 21 years before Americans would have to report personal income in 1913. With that said, Lizzie could have easily made certain that her Uncle John was well provided for in cash, as well as his niece, and no one need be the wiser. Now, all of this, of course, is simply speculation. There's nothing to prove anything that any of this actually took place. It is nothing more than a possible scenario. The idea that Uncle John is the lone killer of Abby and Andrew seems pretty unreliable. If he and Andrew didn't get along, there would be no reason for him to come to visit time to time and spending the night. We have reports that when he stayed, he did often stay in the attic where Bridget also had a room, and sometimes he spent the night in the guest room, as it was on this occasion. But for sake of argument, let's say the two men had a bitter falling out. Does Andrew invite him back for lunch because it's inhospitable to do otherwise? Andrew, by all accounts, was not a warm, caring man. He often was referred to as a skinflint, so cheap he wouldn't allow himself the luxuries of modern appliances. But perhaps he just felt that he didn't need them. He'd gotten along just fine without them all these years. Why change now? However, if Andrew had so angered Uncle John that he couldn't hold his hatred in for a moment longer and lashed out on Abby, for what reason is questionable at best, striking her 19 times with a hatchet-style weapon, cool down for 90 minutes and do it again as Andrew slept on the sofa. Again, it comes back to how did he avoid getting blood on him with the only clothes that he brought with him? Not be seen by Lizzie or Bridget, and also be at his niece's farm during the time of the murders. It literally does not fit or make any sense at all. The reason I believe most people find John Vinnicum Morse as such an unusual person and suspect is his behavior and reaction to the murders. In his trial testimony, he states upon his return for the noon meal, he walks straight into the backyard to the pear tree and begins eating a pear. He claims there are no police in the yard to alert any suspicion that something is wrong. He notes there is a man standing inside the side back door. When he goes inside, he sees that man and Bridget sitting on the stairs of the back staircase. He sees his brother-in-law dead on the sofa, makes his way to the stairs at the front of the house, goes up them just enough to see Abby's body on the floor. He states only then that he sees his niece Lizzie for the first time alone on a sofa. The court records never ask him about his reaction to what was going on. He never makes any kind of statement of concern for his brother-in-law or his niece. It all seems just either too convenient or John Vinnicum Morse is as unemotional as Lizzie. We've stated this before. If you return to a family member's home and find both of them murdered, shouldn't your reaction be what in the world is going on? Is my niece okay? What happened? But it all seems so very drab and apathetic. Now, perhaps we're not being fair, and all of those concerns did take place, and were just never placed into any kind of official record. So where does that leave us? We either have to believe in the stranger from the street scenario, Lizzie in collusion with Bridget, Lizzie and her Uncle John are the killers, or Lizzie acted alone. When reflecting upon the official records, Lizzie is truly the only real suspect. Her behavior in the days leading up to the murders shows that she was fearful that something awful was going to happen. That is called projecting. And when Mrs. Churchill comes into the yard asking, "Lizzie, is everything all right?" she says, "Do come in. Someone has killed Father." What? Who in their right mind finds a dead body in their house murdered the way Andrew was and not feel the immediate fear to get out of that house? Lizzie makes no effort to leave. She's calm for all that we know. How does she know that the threat is gone? Unless, of course, she herself was that threat. She makes several suspect comments that day, and on 2 occasions she makes attempts to get Bridget to leave. Once is the mention of a sale at Sargent's, and this is while Andrew is laying on the sofa in the next room, and then tells her she may go lay down before the noon meal. This is to make sure she can be alone downstairs. She cooks up the mysterious note for Abby as a way to explain her not being there. Then miraculously, she tells Bridget to go and look for her. She thought she heard her come back and must be upstairs. Again, this is very suspicious. During all the commotion, wouldn't one believe that if Abby were alive, she'd come downstairs long before now, if for no other reason to find out what's going on? She made statements to Alice Russell that she thought her father's enemies were going to kill him, again planting the seed to someone. Ronald DeFeo did the same thing after he killed his family. He told people he was sure that it was a mafia hit on his father. The Menendez brothers, after killing their parents, picked up all the expended shells and bullets and disposed of them and the guns, then called police and claimed someone killed their parents. Parricide is nothing new in the fabric of planned murder. Children have often murdered their parents for money, escape from abuse, or whatever perceived threat they have imagined there is. Typically, the initial excuse is an unknown killer must have came in and murdered them, but they can never provide a solid answer as to why they were spared. The Menendez brothers claimed that they were at a movie and then at a club during the killings. Ronald DeFeo, after killing his family, went to work and then pretended to come home and find everyone dead, thus running to a local bar claiming someone killed his entire family. Susan Smith, who drowned both her children so she could be with the man she was having an affair with, made an outrageous claim that a man carjacked her and took off with her children. There is no end to the most outlandish lies these killers will dream up if they think it will help them escape punishment. Lizzie was no different. In the end, we ask ourselves, why was she acquitted? Did the elite of Fall River feel that nothing could be gained from putting Lizzie in prison for the rest of her life, or hanging her as a capital punishment, leaving a permanent stain on Fall River, and instead decided a little of Andrew's fortune could go a long way with their decisions of innocence or guilt? We will never know for certain. All we do know is that on the morning of August the 4th, 1892, someone struck Abby Borden 19 times in the upstairs guest room, and 90 minutes later, brutally bludgeoned Andrew 11 times to the face. And as mysteriously as the killer had appeared, he or she disappeared, and no one was ever brought to justice for the murders. We never hear of Uncle John again. Lizzie and Emma move into the luxurious mansion named Maplecroft on the hill. and both sisters live out their lives in comfort at the expense of Andrew's fortune. If it wasn't Lizzie, then whoever it was did Lizzie and Emma a big favor and provided them with a life free of financial worry and no longer under the thumb of their father.